551. The war for the legacy of the Roman Empire had reignited on Italian soil. Rome, once the ruler of the world, was now divided in two. The West had collapsed, the East had survived. Byzantine Emperor Justinian had one idea in mind: to reclaim the lost Roman territories. The greatest obstacle to this dream, however, was the Ostrogoths in Italy. The Ostrogoths were a people skilled in warfare, feared especially for their heavy cavalry. Long spears, heavily armored horses, direct frontal assault. Their plan was simple: swift attack, single blow, decisive outcome. The Byzantine response, however, was an unexpected name. Not a prince, nor a general who had grown up on the battlefield since childhood. His name was Narses. Narses had been raised in the Byzantine palace. He was of Armenian descent. Because he was eunuch, he had no claim to the throne. He posed no threat to the dynasty. That's why he was close to the palace, but distant from the army. He spent his years not swinging a sword, but reading people, who would retreat who would make a mistake under pressure. Narses knew this. Emperor Justinian understood that the war in Italy could no longer be won by force alone. And so an unusual name was brought to head the army: Narses. When the Ostrogoths heard this decision, they had only one reaction. They underestimated him. To them, Narses was an old bureaucrat who had emerged from palace intrigues. This battlefield was not his place. But the most dangerous commanders in Byzantine history often appeared this way. Narses did not shout at his soldiers. He did not put on a show. He waited for the enemy. Because Narses knew this: true power lies in how the enemy sees you. And the Ostrogoths misjudged him. On the Petra plain, before the swords clashed, the minds would clash. In 551, the two armies did not merely face each other, they were also tested on the same terrain. This was the Petra plain. Petra, at first glance, seemed like an ordinary battlefield, neither too narrow nor completely open. On either side of the plain there were slight elevations. These elevations, limited cavalry maneuvers, made sudden large-scale attacks difficult. This weakened the Ostrogoths' greatest advantage: their speed and striking power. The ground was hard, but not suitable for prolonged attacks. For heavily armored horses, this was a major disadvantage. When the two armies saw each other on this plain, there was no turning back. This was their second major mistake. In the Petra plain, the swords had not yet been drawn, but the battle had already begun. Ostrogoth army, 15,000 to 20,000 soldiers, mostly heavy cavalry. Byzantine army, 20,000 to 25,000 soldiers, archers, light infantry, disciplined cavalry. The Ostrogoths relied on strength, while the Byzantines relied on order. When the two armies faced each other in the Petra valley, the Ostrogoths saw not only the enemy, but also an order. This order was not a conventional battle line. Narses did not establish a straight, rigid front, as was common in Roman tradition. The classic mistake made by the Byzantines: heavy infantry in front, cavalry in the rear. Direct confrontation. Because the enemy opposite him wanted exactly that and had prepared accordingly. Narses arranged his army like a bow curved inward. Center, archers, dense units of archers in several rows. positioned to meet a direct attack. The center was deliberately made to appear weak. Wings, hidden strength. On the right and left wings, heavy cavalry, disciplined infantry, slightly behind and concealed. The real strength was not visible at first glance. Front shape, concave, inward-facing, to draw the enemy in. A wide but closable area. This formation had only one purpose, to invite the Ostrogoths to the center. The Ostrogoth commander saw this before him. A weak center in the middle, units on the flanks that appeared passive. This was an irresistible invitation for a cavalry commander. The backbone of the Ostrogoth army was its heavy cavalry. Armored horses, long spears, a swift, devastating charge. And this force was directed squarely at the center. Narses knew two critical things very well. Heavy cavalry struggles to hold its ground. Horses are defenseless against archers. Armor could protect the soldiers, but not the horses. In Narsis's plan, there was no margin for error. The archers would not open fire prematurely. The flanks would definitely not move. Everyone would wait for the moment of the first clash. This was a battle of patience. On the Petra plain, the Ostrogoths were ready to attack. And Narses wanted exactly that. A moment came in the Petra Valley. Waiting was no longer possible. The Ostrogoth commander saw the formation before him as a weakness. The strength of the Ostrogoth army rested on one thing alone: the heavy cavalry charge. And when that hand came down, there was no turning back. At first, everything went according to plan. The armored horses accelerated, spears thrust forward, the ground began to shake. On the Byzantine front, there was an eerie silence. No one moved from their position. This was the most difficult moment. If one arrow had been shot too early, if one wing opened too soon, the whole plan would collapse. The Ostrogoth cavalry entered exactly where Narses wanted them to. The center. Camera. Cavalry entering the Byzantine center. Archers still waiting. The Ostrogoth commander thought this moment was the beginning of victory. Because the Byzantines had not yet responded, Narses was waiting for this very moment. Not a moment sooner, not a moment later. Two things were now certain on the Petra plain. The Ostrogoths were trapped, and the arrows would soon speak, and the moment arrived. The Ostrogoth attack was now in full swing. Heavy cavalry is devastating in the initial clash, but the moment it stops, it becomes most vulnerable. In the Petra plain, this was precisely what was happening. Now, the Byzantine archers began firing. These were not individual arrows. This was a calculated rain. The armor protected the soldiers, but not the horses. When a horse fell, those behind it couldn't stop. The Ostrogoth attack came to a sudden halt, and the moment it stopped was the moment it lost. Narses had calculated this precisely. The arrows were not targeting the soldiers, they were targeting the horses. Because a cavalryman without a horse is just a foot soldier. When the attack broke down, panic set in. Commands were not being heard, the ranks were becoming entangled. On the Petra plain, the fate of the battle had changed. And Narses was waiting for this very opening. The Ostrogoths were still standing, but control was no longer theirs. When the rain of arrows ceased, everything had changed in the Petra Valley. The army that had just attacked was now standing still. Heavy cavalry needs only one thing: room to maneuver. In the Petra Valley, there was no such room left. Narses had been waiting for this moment. The Byzantine heavy cavalry moved simultaneously from both flanks. Military reality, never before engaged in battle, rested at full speed. This was the cleanest blow of the battle. The Ostrogoth army could no longer turn. Archers in front, cavalry on the flanks, their rear was covered. In the Petra plain, one of the oldest tactics of the ancient world was executed flawlessly: encirclement. The Ostrogoths were now less an army and more a mob. Commands were lost. Some wanted to flee, but there was nowhere to go. Some units tried to put up a final resistance, but the battle was no longer military. It was mathematical. The Battle of Petra ended here. There was no turning back. An army had collapsed before reason. When the swords fell silent in the Petra Valley, only silence remained. Another war had ended, but this war was no ordinary victory. The Ostrogoth army was almost completely destroyed. The results reported by historians. Most of the Ostrogoth soldiers were killed or taken prisoner. The command structure collapsed. Resistance in Italy was broken. This was the annihilation of an army. The Byzantine army, on the other hand, had won the victory with fewer losses. Military assessment. The flanks suffered almost no attrition. The archers performed their duties flawlessly. Discipline remained intact. This was a victory of order. Narses did not succumb to the euphoria of victory, because this victory was won not by emotion, but by calculation. He knew from the very beginning where the war was headed. After the Battle of Petra, the gates of Italy opened to the Byzantines. Historical outcomes. The Ostrogothic kingdom effectively collapsed. Byzantium regained most of Italy. Rome once again became part of the Eastern Roman Empire. Justinian's dream had come closer to reality for the first time. The Battle of Petra is considered by military historians to be the last great victory of classical Roman warfare, because here, geography was used correctly. The enemy's psychology was read. It was not strength, but timing that won. Petra shows us this. Wars are not always won by the strongest. Sometimes the most patient prevail. Narses did not win with his sword, but with his mind.